fresh resolutions adopted by the Allies had produced fresh chances. When Prince Schwarzenberg was preparing to evacuate Troyes for the purpose of continuing his retreat, the latter measure was opposed by the Emperor Alexander. A council of war had been called in the night, and the means of avoiding continental retreats before our small armies had been consulted upon. To produce that effect, it was resolved to collect such massive force that its numbers might henceforth be enabled to bear down courage, to triumph over maneuvers, and to master every kind of chance. The new plan consisted in the uniting of the immense forces of Blucher and Schwarzenberg into one single army. Every operation, whether of attack or retreat, was to be postponed until that grand concentration could have been effected. The order had been already communicated to Blucher to draw near the banks of the Marne, and consequently the only movement to be executed was that of marching to meet him. The plain of Chalon was appointed for the general rendezvous, and Schwarzenberg was proceeding to it by the way of Arcy. How very far was Napoleon from suspecting, harassed as he was with timid counsels and discouraging accounts, that he was still capable of intimidating his enemies to such a degree as to make them adopt steps so highly distinguished for caution? In attempting to maneuver on their flanks, he fell into the new direction they had just taken and found himself engaged with their advance guard. Napoleon was personally exposed to the greatest danger. Enveloped in the dust of cavalry charges, he was obliged to extricate himself sword in hand. He several times fought at the head of his escort, and instead of shunning the perils of the battle, he seemed on the contrary to defy them. A shell fell at his feet. He awaited the explosion and quickly disappeared in a cloud of dust and smoke. He was thought to have been killed, but he got again upon his legs, threw himself on another horse, and went to expose himself once more to the fire of the batteries. Death refused him for its victim. While the enemy's forces were displaying and forming a semicircle which enclosed us in Arcy, the French army rallied under the embattled walls of the houses in the suburbs. We were protected in that position by the fallen night, but we could not expect to maintain ourselves long in it. The enemy pressed more closely upon us every instant. The balls crossed each other in every direction over the little town of Arcy, the castle belonging to Monsieur de la Brief, where the imperial headquarters were established, was pierced on every side. The suburbs were on fire, and there was but a single bridge behind us by which we could extricate ourselves. Napoleon took advantage of the night. On the morning of the 21st, the second bridge was thrown over the Aube, and the movement of evacuation commenced. The action was, however, renewed along the whole of the line and lasted part of the day. We no longer fought for victory, but we kept our ground against the enemy. We restrained and stopped him when he sought to have annihilated us, and we repassed the Aube in an orderly manner. The Dukes de Tarento and Reggio were the last to remain on the left bank. That affair terminated in convincing the army that it was too weak to make head against the enemy's masses. Unable to prevent their passing the Aube, had we it in our power to dispute the road to Paris with them, Napoleon would not fall back as far as the barriers of Charenton before Schwarzenberg. He abandoned the road to the capital and operated his retreat by the crossroads leading to Vitry-le-Français and Lorraine. Chapter 10, Marches and Countermarches between Vitry, Saint-Dizier, and Dulevant from the 21st to the 28th of March. We were henceforth separated from the capital. Its approaches were open to the enemy, but would he have the confidence to march against it? The new line of conduct adopted by Napoleon threatened the principal communications of the Allies, and would perhaps kindle a fatal conflagration in their rear. If they considered that bold maneuver with the attention it deserved, Paris would have nothing to apprehend. They already seemed to follow our traces with uneasiness. Intelligence was received from the Dukes of Reggio and Tarento, who were with the rear guard, that the whole of the enemy's army was in pursuit of us. Napoleon was therefore animated in his distant movements with the hope of drawing away the Allies into a new system of operations, but he did not at the same time lose sight of the left bank of the Seine, which the Allies had just abandoned. His object was to maneuver in such a manner as to have it always in his power to return to Paris by that route. We passed the night between the 21st and the 22nd at the village of Saint-Pierre. On the 22nd, we crossed the Marne at the ford of Rignacourt. A detachment was sent to summon Vitry-le-Français. On the day concluded with useless demonstrations against that place, Napoleon stopped at the castle of Plessis-aux-le-Comte in the commune of Longchamp, between Vitry and Saint-Dizier. He there dictated the Bulletin of Arcis and some dispatches for Paris, but the couriers were no longer able to proceed, and recourse was had to emissaries who promised to reach Paris by the crossroads. On the 23rd, the army continued its movements and passed the night at Saint-Dizier. The Dukes de Vicenza returned to the imperial headquarters at that town. He left Châtillon on the 20th of March, accompanied by the Secretary of Legation, Reneval, and in order to join us, they were obliged to submit to the numerous deviations prescribed by the enemy. The return of the Duke de Vicenza served as a pretext for the murmurs of a half-stifled discontent which pervaded the greater part of the general staff establishments. There were about Napoleon himself too many persons who regretted removing farther off from Paris. Expressions of uneasiness and complaints were no longer suppressed. Some discouraging remarks were heard from several principal officers in the apartment adjoining that in which Napoleon had shut himself up. The young officers crowded about them. The possibility of a revolution became the subject of inquiry. Everyone gave a free scope to his sentiments, and question succeeded question. Which way are we going? What is to become of us? If he falls, we shall fall with him. Napoleon never stood more in need of his powerful resolution to struggle with the opposition that surrounded him. But for the first time, he was unacquainted, or pretended to be so, with what was passing so close to him. After this avowal, which was escaped, we are eager to do justice to the army. Officers and soldiers all retain the energy and loyalty that could alone ensure success to the hazardous campaign which we were on the point of undertaking. Before he adopted a definitive resolution, Napoleon found it necessary to collect more certain information respecting the plan upon which the Grand Army of the Allies had decided, in order to take advantage of the moment and continue the execution of his projects. He directed an attack against all the points of the enemy's march. He dispatched the Duc de Reggio on the side of Lorraine, who established himself at Bar-sur-Ornain, and General Piret towards Langres, who pushed on as far as Chaumont. These routes formed the lines of the operations carried on by the Allies and were covered with their parks, their baggage, and messengers. Intelligence was likely to be obtained in these directions, and important captures might be made. In the meantime, the army occupied a position on the road communicating from Saint-Dizier to Bar-sur-Aube.